Hello and welcome to an episode of The Brain Game Changer, how heartfelt stories, awareness and education can change the game. Each week we delve into the experiences of amazing humans, advocates and organisations from all walks of life who share their adversities, the triumphs after tragedies, the milestones and those brain game changing moments right here in front of the mic. Through this journey together, we may find that we can learn some valuable tools, knowledge or education that will lead us into becoming game changers for ourselves, for someone around us, or even for our community. My name is Melissa. Thank you for inviting me into your space. It is great to be with you. Welcome to the second episode of the Brain Game Changer podcast. In this week's episode, I have the humbled pleasure of speaking with Ambulance Victoria paramedic Waseem Siddiqui. For nearly 14 years, Waseem has been impacting many lives in our community through his dedicated service. We shine a light on the wonderful and specialised mobile stroke unit, the first custom-built stroke ambulance in the Southern Hemisphere, which rolled out in November 2017. Waseem also gives us a taster into his journey of becoming a paramedic, while also reflecting on some personal experiences and sharing through his lens what his role can entail from day to day. In talking with Waseem, he's very passionate about what he does. He did this interview in the afternoon of finishing a night shift and in between picking up his kids from school. I truly believe not all superheroes wear capes. So let's get into our interview. Good afternoon, Waseem, and welcome to the Brain Game Changer podcast. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Melissa.
A paramedic's time is of vital importance. I so appreciate you being here, and personally, I just want to thank you for the amazing work that you do.
Thank you very much. And I'm more than happy to be here. This is a great platform to promote these type of extra services that ambulance services do around the world.
When I first started putting this podcast together, one thing that I wanted to do is shine a light on the amazing work that paramedics do. You work tirelessly, you work many hours, you deal with all forms of life out in the community, and I'm sure every day is different.
Absolutely. I've been doing this for just under 14 years now. And the only days that are the same for me is when I'm in the office. I manage a few teams. The mundane tasks of office work are still there, but when I'm on the road, every day is different. Every job is different.
You just segued well, actually, because I was just going to ask for a little bit of a backstory. Like you said, you've been a paramedic for nearly 14 years.
That's right.
Can you talk us through the decision to become a paramedic during that time?
I actually joined St. John's Ambulance as a first aid operator I think I was about 15 at the time, or maybe 16. They came to our school. So me and my best mate from school, we both joined St. John's. Working with St. John's for a few years, I got to see what paramedics did, but still wasn't something that I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. But my best mate, he actually joined the paramedic course a year before I did. It seemed interesting to me. I also had observed ambulances and paramedics while working with St. John's as a first aider. So I kind of knew what was going on. I enjoyed my first aid time. So he was telling me what he was doing, and I went, you know what, why not? Let's have a crack. So haven't looked back since.
That's amazing. How did the transition to start working on the MCU come about?
Yeah, so everybody starts off as what's called a graduate paramedic. So you do that for a year. Admission started in 2017. So I would have been a paramedic for about 9 years at the time. I did some other roles. I did a little bit of management. I did clinical instructing. Then this opportunity came up via what's called an expression of interest. And you just fill your details out, say why you want to work on it. And I just thought it was an amazing thing to have. The only one in Australia, the first one in Australia. I believe it may have been the first in the Southern Hemisphere. So I thought, why not? This sounds amazing. Luckily, I got in the first batch. It was about 30 odd paramedics. I got trained up to work. So there's a specific training regime, but also stuff like what you wouldn't think of, because the ambulance is much larger. We all had to get our licenses upgraded to medium rigid licenses. So all that training was involved. And then, been on it since it started in November 2017. So we don't work exclusively on the stroke unit. We'll work in our normal areas, wherever we are, on normal ambulances or other roles. And then every so often you'll come back for a month or two to do a couple of months on the MSU.
Okay, great. I'm just going to add to your comment. You are correct. This is the only mobile stroke unit in the Southern Hemisphere. There are only 6 countries in the world that have this form of access to this unit.
Yep.
It's Australia, Canada, Argentina, Germany, Norway, and the United States. The first MSU unit was launched in Germany in 2008.
Yep, that sounds about right. So the mobile stroke unit, or the MSU, is staffed by 5 operators. So there's 3 operators from the Royal Melbourne Hospital. There's a neurologist, a stroke nurse, and a radiographer to operate the CT scan, obviously. And there's 2 paramedics on board. And we get responded to any stroke cases which come up within roughly a 20-kilometre radius of Royal Melbourne Hospital. In Ambulance Victoria, we have specific codings for separate jobs. There's a specific coding for stroke-related cases. A normal ambulance is dispatched, and as well as a stroke unit. So depending on what the information comes through in those calls, the calls get graded into different categories. So it might be a chest pain, it might be somebody who's not conscious, so comes through as unconscious, but there's a specific stroke coding as well. So there might be because someone's saying, oh, they can't move their left arm, or they have a headache, or they have numbness, or they can't speak properly. And these type of symptoms might get coded as a stroke. And if it's coded as a stroke and it's within our radius, then we'll be automatically dispatched along with a normal ambulance. The first ambulance normally gets there. They do an assessment, which would be a normal stroke assessment that we would do on any case as a paramedic. They come up on radio and say, yep, can we please keep the stroke unit coming? It just looks like it's a stroke. It's in the last 6 hours. And then so we keep continuing the job. Once we get there, the neurologist and the stroke nurse will do an assessment, a neurology assessment that would happen in any hospital, any emergency department with the stroke clinicians. So basically we can bring the CT scan to the patient to save some time from getting them from their house to the hospital to the scan to treatment. The idea is to try to treat them in the driveway, basically.
It's like bringing the hospital to the patient.
Yep.
When I had my brain hemorrhage, one thing I wasn't is an expert. I did not know much about it. There was no prior genetic history. You know, like we say, the time saved is a brain saved. That first 60 minutes, that golden hour. Can you discuss what is happening to our human body on the onset of stroke in that first hour that makes it so vital for us to respond and react?
The normal sort of strokes caused by a blockage. So I'm not talking about the hemorrhages like the stroke that you had. Majority of the strokes that happen, which is due to a blockage somewhere in the brain, that part of the brain is starved of blood. So anything past that blockage in the brain, you start to lose brain cells due to lack of oxygen, lack of blood. And those brain cells are not replaceable. So they don't regenerate. So trying to get a thrombolizing agent to break up that clot into the patient as quickly as possible once you've diagnosed that there is a stroke happening. That's basically the main aim, to do that. Just so we stop, as you said, time is brain. We need to get that blockage cleared so we can get blood flow going back to the affected areas. Obviously, that will also show up in the symptomology of the patient, whether there's speech problems, movement problems, deficits, limb deficits, that type of stuff. And that's what they talk about in the golden hour, trying to get the patient thrombolized and the blockage cleared as quickly as possible so we can stop that further damage. The brain cells won't regenerate. So once the damage is there, it will most likely be there for a long time. And then depending on how long the blockage has been there, how long the stroke's been happening, that also has a flow-on effect on rehabilitation, staying in rehab wards, that type of stuff, learning to eat, talk, walk, all that type, depending on how severe the stroke was.
So you've now got the patient back in the ambulance, you're doing all these assessments, then you start making your way to the hospital. In that time frame, is all this information sent to the hospital? So upon arrival, there is a team in place, or who's required in place, a specialist, to then move on to the next stage?
Absolutely. So once we make the decision that, yeah, this is a stroke, we're going to treat this stroke, the images are always sent back to the Royal Melbourne Hospital as it is. There's a collaboration between Royal Melbourne and Ambulance Victoria. So anyone at Royal Melbourne, any of the senior clinicians there can have a look at the scans if they need to make sure that what they're seeing is what they're seeing. But it's not necessarily Royal Melbourne that we will always go back to. It's the closest appropriate hospital that has the facilities to deal with the patients. Whether we're looking to retrieve the clot, so what's called clot retrieval, which is basically go in via a catheter through the groin and grab the clot and pull it out. There's certain hospitals in the metropolitan Melbourne area that can do that, not just Royal Melbourne. So depending on where we are, we might go, yep, we'll go ahead to, say, the Austin Hospital. We'll head that way. The neurology team on board will discuss the job with the neurology team at the Austin Hospital and say, look, this is what we have. We're coming in. This is what we found. Hopefully, the whole point of this service is to bypass the emergency department. These patients have already been assessed. They don't need further assessment in the emergency department. So that'll happen. If it's going back to Royal Melbourne, obviously the clinicians are from Royal Melbourne anyway, but they'll have a chat to the team and say, this is what we have. We're coming back with this patient. And hopefully they can clear the space they need to clear, whether it's for surgery or wherever else they need to go.
There's so many benefits of MSU, and what's been fortunate is that in doing some research, and I was really fortunate to be given this information from the media team, of the 1,920 patients that you've assessed and answered the calls to that required expert care with the MSU, 39% of those patients had CT scans performed in the unit, in the mobile unit, and then 199 of them received the necessary medications to dissolve dangerous clots. That's phenomenal, and it's vital time for that patient.
Absolutely. It's just amazing to see how quickly the patient's going to recover once we've diagnosed a stroke, we've administered the medication, the thrombolysis that we need to. It still amazes me now. We've got a patient who can't move, who can't talk, basically make eye movements with us to communicate. And within 10, 15 minutes of being thrombolized, they're talking to us, they're telling us, I knew what was happening. I knew I couldn't talk. I knew I couldn't move my arm, but I just couldn't tell anyone about it. And, those stories. And a lot of times you'll have a patient in the house who is dependent on everything because they weren't able to talk, weren't able to move, weren't able to stand. And they're sitting up having a chat to you in a stretcher while we're wheeling you into the hospital. It's just amazing to see that transformation and how quick that is. And that would have been time that they will still be having their stroke, still be having the damage to the brain, while we're trying to get them in the back of the ambulance, get them transported to the nearest hospital. Once you get in the hospital, then the stroke team does this assessment, then they get a scan, then the decision is made to treat. So we've saved that time by just being in the driveway.
According to your statistics and research, 50% of the patients who received the clot dissolving treatment on the MSU were treated in the first 90 minutes compared to approximately 13% in the hospital.
Yeah.
So again, you're just reiterating how crucial it is.
And a lot of those delays will also be time to get them into an ambulance and then transport them to the nearest appropriate facility for all that assessment to begin, which luckily can begin from within the lounge room of the patient while we're trying to sort out how to get the patient out to the ambulance.
Is the MSU, is it available over a 24-hour, 7 days a week cycle?
At the moment, mobile stroke unit works from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m, Monday to Friday. Currently not working on public holidays as well. So just Monday to Friday for now. Hopefully this will expand in the future. There is a second MSU planned for 2023.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So that way, hopefully we'll have a bit more coverage across, as you can imagine, being based at Royal Melbourne Hospital, there's 20-kilometre radius doesn't cover metropolitan Melbourne. The crews are getting a lot more aware of calling the MSU early if they get to a job that's out of the MSU catchment, so they haven't been dispatched to go, oh, actually, this looks like a stroke. Can we get the stroke unit coming? Even though the house may be 25, 30 kilometres away. But if they get that onto that early enough, we can usually get there or get very close to where they are by the time they manage to extricate the patient out, which is a lot still effective for the patient because we can still scan them whether it's the driveway or whether the crew starts moving towards a hospital, we meet them somewhere on the road.
Oh, wow.
We just need to meet them somewhere where we can safely get the patient into the back, scan them, make a decision. So it's like a moving stroke hospital, basically, just so we can get that scan in, that all important scan, the decision of where do we go with this.
That's really exciting to hear that there's going to be another MSU unit available, hopefully in 2023. One thing that's interesting is, according to the World WHO organization, across the globe, stroke is within the top 3 of fatalities in the world. So it's needed. Yeah, we definitely need it.
Absolutely.
See, one thing that's coming through is you're very passionate about what you do. And like you said, you haven't looked back. The fact that you're still passionate and to such a worthy and needing role in life. Can I ask you though, and this is probably a loaded question because you've been doing this for so long, us as a community see paramedics probably on the worst day of our lives. So are there some examples of scenarios that still stay with you that you've experienced?
Yeah, look, and you nailed it by saying that we tend to attend to people but probably in the worst day of their life, whether it's for a loved one or for themselves. As benign as it sounds, for us, it's another job, another patient. Now that I'm a bit older in the job, I do a bit more mentoring. I do tell the new graduates that come in to say, look, for you, it's a chest pain, or somebody who's had a low blood sugar, or somebody who's having maybe a bit of a hard time with their anxiety, depression, mental health, whatever. But for them, it could be the worst day of their life. So you still need to treat it as it's a 90-year-old nana who's fallen down the stairs, to somebody who's withdrawing from medication, illegal drugs, all that type of stuff. For you, your job is just to go and look after the patient and make sure that they feel like they've been looked after. For us, it might be just another job in a cap, but hopefully for them, the one and only time they need to use an ambulance service. So. But yeah, look, oh God, a job of the years. I have to say, look, in my time, I've delivered 11 babies.
Oh, amazing.
And every single one of them is just an amazing job. Like, I have to say, luckily, none of these babies have been unwell or difficult deliveries. The mother's all been fine. There's been no issues post the delivery. But I guess just the delivering a baby into the world, it's an amazing feeling. It doesn't matter how many times you do it. 8 years ago now, maybe more. I remember going to this call. It was in sort of the Bundoora area. We would have been maybe 5 to 7 minutes away from the hospital. And I remember telling my partner, let's just get in the back and go. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. There's no one on the roads. Well, let's get her in the back of the ambulance. We'll get to the hospital. And as soon as I opened the back door, basically it was a head crowning. I'm going, no, we're going to bring a baby right here.
Oh, wow.
And then you start thinking about, obviously you've got a mum who's delivering a baby in the freezing cold. We're going to have this newborn baby who's going to be very cold and probably very wet because it was like a torrential downpour. Because of course that's what happens when you're trying to deliver a baby. You just work with your partner and you get through it. But then the feeling afterwards is amazing. Just to roll into a hospital with a mum and a baby and wheel them straight towards the maternity unit to make sure that everything else is fine. I reckon those are the jobs.
That's an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing. I can only imagine what it's like in that moment, like you say, for everyone involved. But like you say, one thing that you talked about is your partner. I can imagine this is also the type of role, like in the MSU, in a normal ambulance, that partnership, that connection between all of you is probably one of the tightest partnerships that you could ever have.
Absolutely. You don't realize how much you need your partner until you need your partner. And that can be from a job that initially started off as just mundane, everything is fine. It might just be I do remember one job that I was working with a really good friend of mine where we managed to tee up a shift together. And we just went to this elderly gent that had, I think he had chest pain initially, but there was a bit of a language barrier. Both husband and wife didn't really speak much English. So we're trying to figure out what's going on, trying to see if we can get onto like a daughter or a son to get help translate for us. And in the middle of this, the patient literally in front of us collapses and goes into cardiac arrest. We knew he was not feeling well. We just didn't know why he wasn't feeling well and what was going on. So while we're in the middle of trying to do our treatment, our assessment, trying to get, our ECGs up and running. He's basically just collapsed, going to cardiac arrest right in front of us. And just that moment of turning into my partner going, mate, I think he's in arrest. And, we have to now start doing this cardiac arrest in the house with a wife now who's going to be freaked out and trying to get extra resources to our scene to give us a hand. And I think that's one thing people don't realize or don't think about in the ambulance world is you're on your own with your partner until you can get back up, which could be around the corner, luckily, or could be 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away. But those 10 or 15 minutes can feel like an absolute lifetime when you're dealing with a patient. And also, sometimes in my role, I work by myself. So I respond to cases just by myself in a sedan. And that can be even more overwhelming when something goes wrong or a patient's really unwell, to be there on scene by yourself, trying to manage what you can manage until you can get back up to you. This is why we love it, and this is why we do it.
Oh, that's you. Again, and I could say it over and over again. I guess I'll give the example. I don't remember what my paramedics looked like. There were two. It was a male and a female. I know their names, but I just remember the woman having quite a reassuring mumsy voice. And even though I'm a woman in my 40s, there was something and I was in and out of consciousness and things weren't looking too great there for a while. But also just a little example of the type of human beings that you are. I was admitted into the Alfred Hospital. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was in ICU. I can't remember for how long, at least 24 to 48 hours. But the paramedic who was with me at the time of my hemorrhage, the next day was dropping off another patient and actually came to look for me.
Yeah.
I sort of remember this, and I was really still out of it and very, very dosed on a lot of drugs at that point. I just thought that was really beautiful. Apparently, she said, I've just come to see how Melissa is. And even though my hearing was very clear, she said, I knew something wasn't good. I got very emotional in that moment, and I just thought she didn't have to do that.
I think that's a good thing in this job and with other health services. The hospitals are very happy for us to follow up on patients, because sometimes you do have that feeling like that paramedic would have with yourself. I just know there's something not right with this patient. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I just know that there's something not right. And the worst feeling is to take someone in, like you said, someone in their 40s or even younger, or even the elderly, but to take them into hospital and then go, I don't know what's happened with that patient. I don't know if they're still going to be around, if they're survived, if they've pulled through, if they haven't pulled through. And just sometimes just to follow it up, to go like, oh, good, I was thinking on the right path, or I'm just glad they're okay. It looked a bit touch and go at the time, and myself dealing with patients who've had subarachnoid hemorrhages, sometimes it doesn't always go as well as it has for yourself. It looks like your recovery's been amazing. It doesn't always head that way.
I'm very lucky. I fall into a category of about 30%. I still have some ailments. The main thing is the cognitive after effects and the trauma.
Yep.
I'm not back in my full-time job. I had to leave that. So there are things that I am dealing with, but I'm very aware in doing more research about which statistic I was lucky to fall into. And that's why I want to do this podcast and shine a light on all the amazing organizations and resources that are out there.
I think I've been lucky in this mobile stroke world, where I've had the opportunity to manage it as well for the last sort of 2.5, 3 years, in terms of talking with RMH about high level stuff on the stroke unit, and talking about new research that they want to do. Obviously training up more and more paramedics to work on the stroke unit. We'll need to do more training by next year once we want the second unit up and running. So I've been fortunate enough to be in that management role and see how it all comes together from inside. Have a chat to the people in charge at Royal Melbourne constantly. We're always talking to them about the stroke unit. It's also a bit, I guess it's very different for everyone, because it's a collaboration between Ambulance Victoria, RMH, but we also have normal vehicle issues with just having a normal ambulance. But unfortunately, unlike other ambulances where we can just drive it back to a fleet centre, swap over to a new ambulance and keep going, You can't do it with this one. So it's also those type of issues that you can work through as the manager to see how am I going to get this ambulance back on road as quickly as possible, because we have to get, sometimes you just can't because it needs a service. It needs a service. It needs a service. You can't going to get it back on road. But other issues that come up, how can we quickly get this rectified so we can get it back on road? So I've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to be working in that role with the stroke unit.
That's right. And they're lucky to have your knowledge and your expertise. Like you've said, you have witnessed it right from when you get the call all the way to the transition to the hospital. And like you said, to all work in collaboration for the best outcome for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
I'm going to ask you one last question. So the name of the podcast is called The Brain Game Changer, How Heartfelt Stories, Awareness and Education Can Change the Game. If there's one piece of vital information, one golden nugget, valuable information that you would like to pass on, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. Follow your gut instinct, especially with your family members, with your children, with whoever it is. If you think there's something wrong, there may be something wrong. So don't ever feel bad about calling an ambulance or going down to the hospital or seeing a GP about something. I thought there was something seriously wrong with this, with whoever it is. So just follow your gut. It tends to be right most of the time.
So true, so true. Gut instinct. It leads us into the right outcomes of where we're meant to be.
Thank you.
Waseem, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I so appreciate your time. Now you can go and have some rest and be with your family.
I'll have to go to the school pickup now.
Okay.
I will soon. Thank you very much for having me on. These type of platforms are really, really good in getting information out. I'm sure there's a lot of people around Melbourne that don't even know we have a specialised stroke unit. And a lot of the times when we do rock up to a case and people look around going, what's that? I was like, oh, that's the stroke unit. That's, the CT scanner. Like, wow, I didn't even know we had this in Melbourne. I'm like, yeah. And then, every time you turn around, my usual line is, yep, and you're lucky because it's the only one in Australia at the moment. And they go, what? The only one? And it's in my driveway. I'm like, yes, it is. It's a good thing. I guess a lot of people don't know about it because it means they haven't come across it and they haven't had to use it. But it's also a good thing to know that it's there if they need it.
So true. I only became aware of it because of what happened to me. I did not know it existed. And since then, I'm so grateful that it does. It's unfortunate that they need it, but I'm so fortunate that it's available to them.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Waseem. Take care.
No worries. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode today and supporting the Brain Game Changer and the guests we interview. I hope it added some reassurance or valuable tools, no matter how big or small, that will continue assisting you in being the wonderful game changer that you are. The best way to support the Brain Game Changer podcast is to like, share with family and friends, or subscribe, so each weekly episode is easily available to you. I'd love to hear your feedback, and you can also find me on Instagram at The Brain Game Changer. Drop in and say hello and check out the regular posts about awareness and education on various important topics and issues. Until next time, sending lots of love and light your way and looking forward to sharing the space with you again soon. Take care.